Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OnPoint with Ben and Am. How are we doing, Am?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, Ben. You?
Good, yeah, really good. So first things first, Amardeep's. Do you want to explain to everyone what's going on with the new haircut?
I knew you was going to say that. Yeah, I've been raising money for cancer, for a family member who's got brain cancer. And when I hit a certain target, which I hit, I said I'd shave my head. Didn't think I'd hit the target. Did hit the target, and now I've got a shaved head. But actually, interestingly, I've got. So this was about nearly 2 weeks old now, but I'm like desperate to get back into the barber because I feel like it's gone fuzzy and like I need to like get it
A
shaped.
buzz cut, a proper side back, short back and sides now.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do that as it starts to grow out. But yeah, so that's why I am.
Well, well done, well done.
Thank you.
You spent, and again, you did it so quickly. So, and I'm sure you'll agree with me. Thank you to everybody who saw it on LinkedIn and raised money straight away. It's
Yeah,
a
thanks for
very,
that.
very good cause. But you've also been busy as well, haven't you? Last week you went to an event. You spoke on a panel, I think.
I did. Yeah, I did the Global Women in Tech Festival. I was on a panel speaking about cryptocurrencies and blockchain and the metaverse and stuff like that. So that was quite interesting. It was really good turnout, good crowd. It's fun.
Fantastic. Yeah, you're definitely out there at the moment, aren't you? Very good.
Yeah.
Really delighted to welcome our guest today, Jordan. Jordan and I know each other about 18 months now. How are we doing, Jordan?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Very well.
Good stuff. I can probably try and give a decent enough overview because we've known you and worked with you, but it's probably fair to say you do a better one yourself. Do you want to give the listeners a bit of a background on who you are and where you are and all that jazz?
Sure thing, yeah. So I'm Jordan Spain. I'm head of engineering at a company called X-Lab, which provides interoperability solutions in health tech and healthcare, basically. I've been here about 18 months, or just short of 18 months. I joined as a principal engineer, and then when the position came available for head of engineering, I applied for and got it. And I've been sat in that position for just over 3 months now, which has been interesting, full of challenges that I wasn't anticipating and stuff, but it's all good fun. I've been working as a software engineer for about 10, 11 years. I've worked prior to here, I've worked at places like Just Eat, EasyJet, one of the largest defense contractors in the world, but I've also worked at much smaller scale up type entities as well. So quite a spread in different domains. Very much enjoying working in healthcare. The company that I work for now played a massive part in the UK's COVID response, and that was very rewarding to be a part of. And it's definitely an industry I want to stay in the future as well. So, yeah.
No, that's great that you've found an industry within technology that you're really happy in and passionate about. Because I think a lot of people struggle. They work in technology, and you can work anywhere in any industry, but to find where you feel like you fit and you're happy is a big challenge for a lot of people, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a natural. Well, it seems in hindsight an obvious choice because I've been very always sort of product oriented and user oriented, and I enjoy seeing the impact that my decisions and my efforts make. But when it's for a company that is about ordering takeaway, that's less fulfilling than something like working in healthcare with the potential to improve people's chances of quality of care, or in the case of COVID and other examples, actually potentially saving lives and things like that. The impact of that is way more real and rewarding and fulfilling, I think. So it was in hindsight it was an obvious choice, or an obvious conclusion, but definitely I think it's one I'd recommend to anybody who sort of cares about what they're doing and the impact of their outcomes. I think I'd struggle to find something as fulfilling, I think.
Oh, great.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and congratulations on the promotion. So yeah, a couple of years ago, I did a podcast when I started up by myself in doing my podcast in COVID. I spoke with Matt Barrow. Matt's the CEO of the business, and Matt gave a good overview of what you guys were doing at the time and how you were you were started to scale up really quickly because of the impact of COVID and the response that was needed, and did an amazing job. I want to get into talking about modern engineering as now that you're the engineering manager down at X-Lab. But before, I'm interested to kind of find out a little bit about maybe where X-Labs are now. So you've helped everyone through COVID, and the team has scaled up massively. It's been a pleasure to be working with that. Where is the business at now?
Sure, yeah. So there's a long answer to that question, but I'll try and keep it a bit more succinct. But yeah, so I mean, the company itself, when it started about 17 years ago, had massively different aims and ambitions that it does today, as most companies do, and as they go through scale. When people like Matt Barrow joined the business and saw the potential and firsthand, the benefit of the products that we provide to entities like the NHS, saw way more potential scaling and growth in that. So where we are today is looking at moving. Not just moving internationally into other markets as well, but looking at other sort of adjacent markets within healthcare within the UK and different types of services that we provide. I won't bog it all down with sort of domain terminology too much, but we typically provide services for pathology testing, and there's a lot more out there. One of the things we're sort of investigating in a minute, and there's a big push for is genomics testing, which is rare cancers and blood diseases, and it's an entirely different workflow. Which is all pretty much pen and paper based across the country at the minute. And I guess it's just about extending what we have now. But I think COVID itself has changed not just this business, but probably the entire face of, well, at least technology within healthcare, because the scale it brought. And there's it would be remiss of us to dismiss COVID as a thing that happened once and, something isn't going to happen again. I mean, I remember I went on a lab tour shortly after I joined the company to the lab that an NHS trust that uses Labnostic, our core product, and there were labs on different floors of the same building. So what Labnostic, our core product, does is it allows interoperability between different labs. But there was this one building where there were labs on different floors that couldn't even communicate with each other, and that was fine when they were like doing 10 tests a day and they could fax that upstairs. When COVID happened and you're doing thousands and thousands, it's just not scalable. And I think it's changed a lot of people's opinions and perception, changed the market. I think there was briefly a time where Amazon, for example, got involved during COVID about pharmacies and dispensing and things like that. And I think it's strange that it's been so unaltered for so long, and why there are such monolithic big entities in this sort of healthcare industry and healthcare and technology without it changing yet. So I think it's not quite like the last great market to be cracked or whatever, but there is so much room for improvement worldwide, not just UK. So it's a very interesting place to be in, and X-Lab are very well positioned to be in there at the minute, because they have a long history of supporting services like the NHS, and being involved in healthcare in general in this country and others. And the way the market is going is very good for the changes in that perception is very good for companies like X-Lab.
I think it's a one real positive that we can say is that's come out of COVID, isn't it? And I think X-Labs have done a fantastic job, and obviously on a good path as well. I think going back to what you're saying regards kind of tech for good in general, I think when I'm speaking to engineers now, it's far more relevant that people want to be involved in making a difference and doing something good, be it environmentally or healthcare or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic business. I know you guys have done some great stuff over the last couple of years, but I want to talk a little bit more about, again, where your engineering team is at right now and where you're going. The good thing is that where you've kind of scaled quite quickly, and now it's maybe plateaued a wee bit, you've managed to kind of implement some really good modern approaches towards engineering, which is something Am and I are very keen to discuss in a bit more detail. I don't know really where to start with this. I know that you and I have spoken a little bit in the past about OKRs. Are OKRs implemented at X-Labs? And if so, how are they helping?
They are, yes. So I guess there's some context on OKRs would probably be good. So OKRs stands for objectives and key results, and it's basically a way of aligning on what you want to achieve and how you're going to measure achieving that. So typically although people have different implementations of them, typically they will cascade. So your sort of C-suite level might have their overall objective of where they want to get to, and then objectively how they're going to measure those things without sort of tying it to a particular implementation. And then those at the sort of levels below will base their objectives on the steer from that. So it's sort of like a funnel out. One of the big things about OKRs is that they get you thinking more about outcomes rather than outputs. So rather than just measuring your success at doing something by the number of times you've deployed to production or the number of customers who've done X or whatever, it really gets you separating yourself from the idea of things being done because they're in production. For example, in engineering, just because you've shipped it to production, does that actually mean you've achieved anything that you wanted to achieve? Well, there's this concept of there's a guy called John Cutler who is attributed with coining the phrase feature factory, which is where he says a lot of engineering teams operate analogously to assembly lines, where they will just pick up something, work on it, and then it's done and it goes out the door. And that's very well miserable sounding, but that's kind of the opposite of what OKRs are supposed to cultivate in culture, where you have an objective of a raw target that you want to achieve, whether that's you want to, example, if you reduce onboarding time for a customer or increase engagement in a particular thing or whatever. And then you separate yourself entirely from the hows that you're going to do it, not the implementations, and you track your progress towards that objective via key results, which are often mistaken for KPIs, whereas KPIs are like a measurement of health. Key results are a measurement of progress towards your target aim, and they're supposed to be moonshots as well. So they're supposed to be something that's just slightly out of reach and unattainable in order to try and stretch the team and breed innovation in what they do. And importantly, because they're not attached to a particular implementation, it provides teams the freedom and autonomy to pivot and throw away what they've done effectively if it's not achieving that target metric. So there's I will get onto how X-Lab use them, but just for some context, there's a good example of this a bad example of an OKR might be the objective is to release our new version of this e-commerce site. And the way those key results are set up is, 100% of pages are released, and some other arbitrary ones that I can't think of on the spot. But if you were to ask somebody why you want a new website, they might say, well, the existing one's terrible. And then if you say, well, why is it terrible? And they say, well, our SEO is really bad. And you say, right, well, why is it important that the SEO is bad? They say, well, all of our traffic comes from paid advertisements and it's too expensive. You say, right, so that's your objective. Your actual objective is not build a new website, it's reduce the reliance on paid traffic, right? So if you were to just swap out the objective but keep the key results the same and have them as 100% of pages released, does that do anything towards tracking your reduced dependency on paid traffic? No, it doesn't. So a better one would actually be something like an objective of reduced reliance on paid traffic and key results like 80% of traffic to the website is organic, and there's been a 45% reduction on paid ads, for example. And that objectively measures your progress towards that outcome. And then you're free to do whatever you want then in order to achieve it. So that's the general gist behind them. And that's something we do at X-Lab, So the idea is to have these sort of autonomous, empowered teams where those OKRs operate almost as a contract between, say, me as head of engineering, perhaps a director of product, and those product teams, where we say, well, the thing we care about for this quarter, for example, is reduce the time it takes to onboard a customer, or we'd like the platform availability to improve to 99.99% or something like that. And there's ways of measuring that. And then it's effectively I trust you to operate as a professional and to know what the right thing to do is. Obviously, we provide some wider steering or guardrails around that. And then it's go and show me what you can do in 3 months, which is a very healthy, rewarding way of working, really. So yeah, that's a kind of a brief overview.
It's a very good overview actually of OKRs in general. And I've been part of OKR processes as well in the past. One thing that I found that can happen, and you've got to be really balanced as a whole organization, is you can have a bit of OKR fatigue where everyone is just doing OKR planning and they spend their 3 months or whatever time box they do it. It usually is per quarter, isn't it? Planning and getting ready for the planning, then doing the planning and then starting the whole process again. So I have experienced some organisations where they experience that, but that generally speaking, where I have experienced OKRs, they have worked really well. And I've known 2 or 3 teams in 2 or 3 different organizations where they have thrown their work away because they've realized we need to pivot. It's actually not achieving it. We've done a proof of concept. We've started productionizing the proof of concept. We don't like it. We're just going to chuck it away. Giving teams that kind of autonomy, as opposed to saying, how many velocity points are you throwing out and how many features have you got out this month? You know, taking that pressure away from them, it really does breed innovation, because you're allowing people to fail, and you've got 3 months to do it in. They've got a time box, and it's a decent amount of time box as well. So I'm quite into the OKRs. But something else as well that Ben had mentioned to me was this kind of product engineering mindset, or however you want to phrase it. I don't want to give you the phrase. It would be really interesting for our people, our audience. I love saying that, and really, it's probably just my mum watching.
Well, it's not for me. It's something that I'm hearing more and more of now. You know, and it's kind of breaking the wall down and understanding, you know, where does this term come from and what does it actually mean? Yeah,
and I'm also interested as well when you talk about it, Jordan. Has that always been there, and is it just now been? Is it been brought to the limelight because it's got a name? You know, what is that? So if you want to talk a little bit about product engineering, it'd be really good to hear that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's something I'm a massive advocate for. It fundamentally changed the way I view what I do and how much I enjoy what I do as well. I think it always has been there, but just without that name. There's always people who have thought like this, but now, I guess, with sort of an explosion of online communities and the amount of, you know, sort of thought leaders that are out on platforms like Twitter and stuff like that, it's very easy to like get a group or a following of people who believe the same things, and then they all want an identity, and I guess that's then how they refer them to themselves. I guess the important distinction to make is, like, product engineering is just an attribute, not necessarily an entire, like, a specialization. So it's very different to, you know, you might classify someone as a full stack or a back end or a front end engineer, for example. Each and any one of those could be a product engineer. It's an attribute that you can apply to. And I think the easiest way of describing it is taking that sort of feature factory analogy that I mentioned before, and it's somebody who's the antithesis of this, the opposite of that, somebody who cares almost more about the why than the how. So why are we doing this? Realizing that, you know, not in the sense to avoid having to do any work, but in the sense that they understand that the cost of building the wrong thing, and by the wrong thing I mean something that doesn't directly impact or improve customer lives and behavior, is actually so much more expensive than building nothing at all, because you end up, there are implications of that. You change how a user uses the software or the products that you build them. You instill probably tech debt in building whatever you're building for no reason, with no justification. You end up with a platform that isn't organized around a customer, which ends up alienating them anyway. So it's about product engineering at the core of it is doing things like challenging, using the 5 whys, which is an example I gave in the OKR thing, being extremely data driven, measuring the impact of what they do and interrogating the impact of their actions as outcomes rather than outputs. So somebody who doesn't necessarily care how many times a week they deploy, although obviously the higher that figure, the better. I'm not saying reject it, but as in that they're not using that as the core metric as to whether they're actually doing well at their job. How they view doing well at their job is identifying what customer problems are and solving them. So I find it's people who work very closely or enjoy working very closely with product managers and teams who like going and speaking to customers all the time. There's a team I worked on before, kind of where this really dawned on me was when we were speaking to customers every single week. So either customers who had used our platform or people who hadn't. So at the time I worked for a company that provided comparison services, so like energy switching and things like that. So we'd either speak to people who had switched, but then through like market research and general industry trends, we'd identified that 75% of the people in the country had never switched, and most people who did switch were ones who were just recurring switchers. So it was about speaking to people rather than just having an idea and saying, let's try this. It was about speaking to people who hadn't actually switched before, trying to understand the context and reasoning behind that, and then orienting your solutions around that, which is so rewarding when you're trying to move a needle. And then you go and speak to loads of people, and then you come up with multiple ideas, because most of your ideas are going to be wrong anyway. That's another sort of attribute of a product engineer, is knowing that most of the ideas you are going to have are going to be terrible.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this kind of, you'd hope that in teams, all of the team, and it's going to lead us nicely onto our next point, but all of the team are bought into like we're calling it product engineering now, product engineering mindset anyway. You want them to be questioning it. You want them to be asking the whys as well as explaining the hows. Yeah. Hopefully we've moved away. I don't think we have, but hopefully we have moved away from that kind of just do it. I want this feature, just do it. There was a time when a lot of engineers I've worked with in the past in previous companies, they have questioned it, and I've watched people just say, well, that's what we're going to do, so just do it. And it's kind of been shut down of, why are engineers questioning what we're doing, what we want as product managers? And it's interesting because they're a team. They're a team of people. They're a unit of people, and they think that they're against each other. So it's really, really interesting, actually, this challenging concept. I used to be a teacher, and there was a subject in one of the curriculums I taught was in the International Baccalaureate. There's a subject called Theory of Knowledge, if you're familiar with it. Right. And Theory of Knowledge, the subject was a mandatory subject you had to do as a student. And what it did was make you challenge the knowledge, challenge the theory. So it's a little bit like, it does blow your mind a little bit, but so you'd get students in the classroom, and these are like sort of A-level students, and they'd be sat in their science class, and they'd have to apply their theory of knowledge, and that would be to question the science and question the methods. And I think that's essentially what we want engineers to do. We want them to question it, because actually, if we all start questioning the why, we are going to give the customer the best possible experience ever, and it will be based. And then if they're getting the best experience ever, the data that's being collected off the back of that becomes the most valuable data that they can possibly get. It's very easy to look at your reviews, for example, and get the bad ones and fix those problems. But how do you better somebody's experience that's already having a good experience? There's like the value. There's where we're going to start hitting everybody's targets in terms of like making profit larger, making customers better, getting more customers, all these types of things. So it is interesting. And have you successfully, like at X-Labs, our engineers, are they feeling confident to be able to do that? I'm going to go into cross-functional teams in a second. And I think, are your product people and your delivery people and your engineering teams, are they happy in those situations where things are being questioned? And is it productive?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something you have to, that sort of idea of farming for dissent is something you have to cultivate in people, and you need psychological safety in place in order to do that. It just categorically will not happen if it's not there. So I think there's an element of, spent a lot of time laying that groundwork and encouraging people to do so. And then gradually, I think just like anything that happens organically, when people start to see the value in it, when the first person sort of puts their foot over the edge, or dips their toe and does it, and then they see the value in that organically, it sort of gathers momentum, and people do it more and more. I wouldn't say we're perfect at it, but it's this is a work in progress. I mean, the company has scaled so massively over the last few years that there wasn't even a product function a couple of years ago, and it was and then initially that was distinct, but rather than a product and engineering function and things like that, gradually making steps towards it. But it's very much encouraged, and I guess this is kind of a nice segue into what you were mentioning there with cross-functional teams. But the point you made about teams of people being told, just do it. I think that comes from this mindset where, or in organizations, especially larger enterprise organizations, where engineers are treated as resources rather than people. And they're seen as a cost center rather than a profit center. So that's because of the way the company's organized. Engineering ends up being a bottleneck where anything the rest of the business, which are all going off in independent directions, want to do something, they end up backing this queue up and up and up for engineers. And then they're overworked and they don't have anything. It's like, we can't get this done because engineering hasn't got this out of the way. And it's like, well, that's because the way your company's been structured, overload them. You're not allowing them to, you're hamstringing them before they've even got to work by doing that. So I think that's where that kind of comes from, and we're definitely against that. One of my big sort of things for my sort of 12 months in engineering, or the first 12 months in engineering as head of engineering, is to make engineering at X-Lab a profit center, not a cost center, by doing all of these sorts of things. So yeah.
Do you know what's mad? I once worked in a company where I did everything, but let's say the program kind of level of stuff. So you'd have this, like, when we were all in the office and we had whiteboards, this big whiteboard with all the programs of work and the projects and the products that we had to do. And we would have anything between 10 to 15 products or projects running at any given time, between around 40 to 50 people. So it was quite pressury. And one of the categories was a JFDI. And do you know what a JFDI is?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Jordan knows. Do you, Ben?
No, I don't. Please educate me.
It means just fucking do it. And we had a whole category. So we would star the project on priority and stuff like that. And then we'd all get together, like, maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, because we had to do it that because there was so much going on. And somebody would be like, where's that come from? Like, I didn't realize that was in our roadmap. And it would be starred with JFDI, and everybody just knew it's a just fucking do it. And it's awful because we literally just fucking did it. We didn't have a choice. So JFDI, that phrase is used loads in technology. That's what literally someone's told us to do it. We have to do it. We can't question it. And it's quite interesting because, and I do want to go into cross-functional teams, but it's interesting because quite often your JFDIs come from quite high up. And that's the fine line of, as an organization, we want to become autonomous and innovative. And, you know, ultimately all this innovation leads to your profits getting bigger, right? And customers being more satisfied. Yet these JFDIs that do come in all organizations are generally from C-suite or above.
Yeah.
Because if I worked in X-Labs with Jordan and I got something in from Jordan that comes into my team and he's like, you just have to do it, I'd be able to probably question it. But there's this, like, fear, isn't there, of, like, if someone from the C-suite or above gives me a JFDI, can I question it?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, as well, I mean, to be clear, not all C-suite people are evil.
No, I know. I know that.
But yeah, I think, I mean, I'm glad that, you know, at this stage, I'm not the person who has to make the sort of decisions that people at that level do. And sometimes there is genuine context. It's all related to the context of your company. If you're a very small company who is struggling and you need that short-term win to do something for a customer in order to get an invoice to them, but long-term it's bad for the product. That someone at that level might say, well, do you want to get paid this month or not? You know, I've not really worked in any company where it's been in that position, but I understand the
and also, I guess, also reactive as well, because there's been lots of companies that have had to react, especially to, like, COVID and the pandemic. So that there's definitely use cases where it's warranted. Yeah, it's when it becomes a category.
Yeah, if you can't have healthy conversation about it in the first place, I mean, ultimately you could still have a healthy conversation about it and get the end result is JFDI. But I guess providing space for the context and the conversations to happen at the first place is so much healthier than just a choose black box, like an opaque reason of, you know, I'm the highest paid person and this is my opinion, so you're going to do it. There's actually a great, you know, some people struggle with that. Some people are naturally with it. There was a fantastic product manager I used to work with who would just do the 5 whys thing. So there was a particular C-suite personnel, they were the sort of chief marketing officer, and they would come all the time with some inane request because they'd had a good idea. Yeah. He would just say why, and then she'd get one level down, and then he'd say why again, and it was getting a bit fluffier. And by the 3rd why, they were found out, and it was because I thought it was a good idea, and he just go, no, we're not going to do that, and that was good, you know. But if you don't get that space to have that in the first place, then that's not.
And it brings us on to the cross-functional teams, because you said that a few years ago you didn't really have a product function, and then it was a little bit isolated, and now they're all integrated. So can you just talk a little bit about the cross-functional teams at X-Labs? Yeah,
sure. So I mean, it's as I say, through all the scale, it's a real work in progress. The end sort of target or ideal for me is where we have members from different functions operating in the same team that are aligned around the same objectives. So at the minute, I mean, and this is kind of deliberate as well, as we introduce people to the concept of OKRs and being more outcome driven than output driven. But at the minute, they do sort of cascade. but you might have a team. You have all of these teams that have high interdependency, but because of the way these objectives have cascaded, they've all got their own objectives, which are at times orthogonal to other teams.
Yeah.
So although they're still pointing up to that top level objective of do the thing or achieve this thing, you might have somebody in, say, a customer success team or a sales team or an onboarding team, which points into that top one, and you have some engineering teams that are do this thing, do this thing, do this thing, which all point there, but the way they get there is like that, and it differs. And then that can highlight the problems with organizational relationships. So there's a thing called Conway's law, which you may be aware of.
I am, but I'm not sure if Ben is.
No, fair enough. I'll mansplain it to Ben then. So the idea is your software architecture will reflect your organizational structure, basically. So if you take a look at like the pre-DevOps movement era type thing, you would have teams where you might have, say, a team of back-end developers, a team of front-end developers, a team of database admins and QAs, and then your software architecture is going to be a series of those components in that format with big shared databases as bottlenecks and constraints. And if there's ever a time when your software architecture has to fight your organizational architecture, the idea is the organizational architecture will win. There will be JFDIs, there will be all of this sort of stuff. So the idea is, and how we're initially trying to look at forming real, true cross-functional teams, at X-Lab, where I am, because it's still, there's still some people who have a say in this. Obviously, I'm not, I'm just head of engineering. It's just a good idea, I think. It's to do what's called like an inverse Conway maneuver, which is where you take what your ideal target architecture is and the way you want to work, and then you form your teams around that. So whereas at the minute we might have these teams operating orthogonally, although very closely together, in each of those interactions there's a queue in between those teams as to how those teams work together. And queues are bad as a rule of thumb because they increase cycle time. They're non-representative of the amount of work in there. And if, say, you have a sales team that does a load of work to onboard a customer or sell them a new feature or something, and then that request has to sit in a queue until another team can pick it up, all of that work, the precursor work that the sales team has done, is yielding nothing until that other piece is done. So the idea is we're going to try and eliminate queues entirely and identify the areas of the business that work the most closely as it is today, and just try and remove those queues. That's the ultimate sort of objective. Whether we get there or not is a different thing. But the most productive teams that I've ever worked in are cross-functional teams where I've had, so for like an e-commerce site, you have someone from content there, someone from sales, someone from marketing, and you're aligned around the same objectives. So it might be improve the SEO of the website, and it's fast then because you don't have competing priorities, you don't have conflicting priorities. There is real flow, there's no queues, and that's the idea behind it, really.
That's great, and I think it's mental because I think at one point cross-functional teams were, there's a product person in there. That was it. So it's moved a lot. So it's nice to hear you say something like someone from content, someone from marketing. That's because that is a truly cross-functional team. And we can sit and we can talk about cross-functional teams quite a lot because I really, really enjoy it. But I was going to ask kind of like a final question, if that was all right. Sure. And it was more around what do you think of the future of health tech, at least in the UK? Of course, you've probably got a lot of knowledge on the health sector. And just from my limited knowledge, I know that the NHS is under a lot of pressure. There's more private companies opening left, right and centre. We're seeing more benefits for joining an organisation being healthcare and stuff like that. So what are some of the things you think are coming?
Yeah, I think again, based on COVID, it was a bit of a cold water dunk to a lot of people and entities involved. I mean, in the COVID response, although track and trace has had a bad name for it, test and trace was or TTC was wildly successful in the sense of the infrastructure that was put in place so quickly and the results that were delivered to so many people and tracking the spread of the virus across the country. But that was really enabled by heroics because the infrastructure wasn't in place to anticipate that sort of thing. So I think that's changed a lot of people's opinions on that sort of aspect. But I think one of the biggest trends from that is about bringing like diagnostics closer to the patient. So if pre-COVID you'd said everyone in the country was going to do a flu test every day and send the result off and get the result back the same day, you'd think that person was insane, because there's no way, we don't have that sort of stuff in place. But and lo and behold, it sprung up pretty much overnight in order for us to do that. And I think this is just my own personal opinion here as well. I think that's a trend that's going to come more to the forefront as we see, and I talked before about the sort of, the size of the entities and the potential slowness at which they can move as those other people enter the market, and they see, all these opportunities for growth and scale because of how I guess left alone, for want of a better phrase, that had been in the past. I think that's going to come more and more and more. If we ever get to a stage where you're doing, instead of just when you've got like a bad hangover and you Google it and you look at WebMD and you think, oh, that's it, I'm dying. It's going to go a step further than that. It's going to be, I think I might have this thing. I'm going to order a test for it. That's going to come to me. I'm going to take it. I'm going to send it off, and somehow I'm going to do that, which comes with loads of implications, not least, like private information, like PII and healthcare data is a massively protected source. And, if people are moving into the industry, they've got to be very, very aware of that, because there's potential for horrible things to happen with that. So, which is a bit of tangential from what I'm saying before, but the long and short of it is I think things are going to change, and I think things are going to change quickly. And I think I don't think, say, another pandemic happened in 5 years, I don't think we'd be in the position we are now. I think there's far more people, as you say, it's becoming like almost like a pseudo benefit of jobs. You get to work in healthcare as a thing, and I think there's more and more interest in doing so. More and more people are thinking of what changed during COVID, and then looking at the existing processes that we have and thinking why such case. So another case in point is like I can't remember the actual term for it, but like teleconferencing with doctors, like having a video call with a doctor, just something that wouldn't have happened 5 years ago.
And it's crazy, Jordan, because if you even went back like 5 or 6 years, if I even asked my parents, like, would they feel comfortable having, it's almost like when you go to the doctor and you're sat in front of a doctor, you feel more assured that your issue, whatever it is been dealt with. Whereas people feel so funny about being on the phone. Whereas now, since the pandemic, I don't think I've been to the doctor because I do everything online. And in fact, I broke my finger and I'm due for some surgery, and every single appointment, physio, everything has been online. And and I felt,
mad, isn't it?
Yeah, that's crazy, right? I'm if they tell me that I have to have my surgery online, I'm going to question it a little bit. But generally speaking, everything's been online, and now it's obviously more convenient for me. They can definitely see more patients, and I don't feel like I'm getting a disservice by being online, and it just hopefully frees them up to do. And it also brings in, it's just so vast, things like that, because there'll be so many doctors that need to work from home for various reasons that I now have the ability to work from home. Whereas if you said that 5 years ago, that would never be a thing. Doctors working from home would be like blasphemy, right? So I think it's great for the industry, actually.
I think in general as well, people just looking after themselves a lot better since COVID. I think because of that, everyone wants to live a healthier lifestyle, and whatever app you might download and however that integrates with Apple Health and all the different functionalities that they have every time there's a release, people looking after themselves better. And I think that's going to be more so for the next generations. I think if I was my mother, even now at her age, since COVID, she's a little bit more kind of interested in what's in her health. But I think that people growing up now are just, we're aware of it because of COVID. So I think that's why there's such a big drive. Listen, Jordan, we could probably talk all day, but thank you very much for your time. I know you're a busy guy. I really appreciate you coming on board. I always say it to anybody who comes on, are you open for people connecting with you on LinkedIn? Is that the best way to reach you?
It will be, LinkedIn. That would be the best way. And I'm open to anybody. Anyone wants to have a chat about anything I've said or in general, or wants to disagree with me, that's absolutely fine. So,
Good. Thanks so much, Jordan.
Debates. That's a good question.
Healthy debates.
We'll listen. Looking forward to catch up in person soon, and hopefully we can have some of these conversations in a meetup event that we're going to look to arrange. So that'd be really good. Thank you very much again for coming on.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks very much.
Speak soon.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.